In this video we will discuss the custom services feature of the platform, the difference between a production and a development version of the microservices, a short walkthrough of writing code, editing some code in development environment and then promoting it to production. So let's get started. We start by going to the services item on the left hand menu bar, and we go and create a new service. My service 2 we'll call it. Description of test. So what's happening now is we're creating a Git repository, a Jenkins job, and a Docker image repository. The Jenkins job pulls down the initial code for the microservice, compiles it into a Docker image, and then runs that Docker image as our first version of the microservice in production. So now our microservice is built and is running. So we see the status here of running, and we just deployed it. So this is the build state of the microservice. In the overview section of microservices, we're talking about the production version of the microservice. This is what users will see, or custom widgets see when they're talking to this API endpoint here. This is a very useful tool to test your production microservice. Right now, if we click on send, we'll get a little response here saying connecting.io node microservice. Now we'll go in and edit this and get it to say something a little bit more useful, or to simply change it. But for now it's sufficient to understand that the logs that you see here in this section, the API endpoint that you're hitting here, is the production version of the microservice. So now let's go over to the code editor. So now, the code editor, first off, it shows us the source files of our microservice. Here it's very minimal. We have the Docker file, which describes how the platform produces a Docker file from the source code, an index.js file, which is simply a little bit of Express to produce some API endpoints, and a package.json where we put in our dependencies. You'll notice here slight difference in the API endpoint itself. You see that there's right here in the middle there's /dev/ between the microservices root and the myservices2 endpoint. And this is to instruct the platform to direct any of the requests to this microservice through to the development version of the microservice. And lastly, we have here a terminal. This terminal is actually a bash shell inside a Docker image that we make to allow you to do nice quick code edits and to see the result of your actions. So we saw earlier when we initially created the microservice that it went through a Jenkins build job, and then it created a Docker image, and then it deployed that. And that's a reasonably long process. It can take up to about 2 minutes. This is a very long time if you're making regular changes to your code. So to assist in that, we've provided a development environment where you can stop and start the code as you wish. Any changes to code up here will get propagated into this little sandbox where you can start and stop your microservice at will. We find that frequent changes to code and compile is something that we do, and waiting for 2 minutes for every tiny little change is unreasonable. So let's make one example change here. I'm going to edit the index.js file to give us a different output when we call the API endpoint. I guess to reinforce the idea that we have a development version of our microservice and a production version of a microservice, I want to just put in this is the dev version. Now, so just so it's clear, when you're making changes here and you're starting and stopping, you are not starting and stopping production, you are starting and stopping a development copy of the microservice. So you are free to experiment and make changes that you would be fearful of doing if they were live edits to a production API endpoint. So to test this thing out, we're going to save the code. This is a commit to the Git repository, so we'll put in something useful. Get API endpoint. Confirm. So this is making a commit to the Git repository. Once the commit is completed, it's then going to copy that code in here into the development Docker container. So if I go in here and click hit ls, it tells me what code I've got, and if I do a cat on index.js, we should see the update to our code, which we do. So here is the code edit we made. This is the this is the file copied into this area here. So now, what we want to do now is we want to try run this thing. So in order to do that, this is a Node.js microservice, and we need to install all the dependencies. You'll notice once again, if I do ls, we've only got a Docker file, an index.js, and a package.json. We don't save all of the dependencies. If we go back in here, you'll see that we require Express. Express needs to be installed using npm. So if you look at the package.json, you'll see the dependencies. One is Express, another one is a custom module that we provide for making microservice development a bit easier. So to install our dependencies, we do npm install. Okay, so there now the dependencies are installed, and to start we call npm start. Of course you can call node space index.js. It's probably better to call npm start. You can edit your package JSON to do whatever you like. At npm start, you'll see here in the package JSON, all it does is in fact call node index.js and redirecting standard error to standard out, so that we see everything in the log file when we go back to look at it in production. Okay, so now I'm going to test my development microservice. Here by clicking send, we can call all manner of verbs on the API. We've just implemented get so far. And there you go. This is the dev version, is the output of this microservice. That's still running away. Just to once again highlight the fact that we're not editing production code until we deploy. We can go back in here and click the very same action, get, and we're still seeing the old output in production. So what we want to do now is we're happy that we've made our code edits and we want to deploy this to production. I'm going to click on deploy. And this is the same process now as we saw when we initially created the microservice. We're going to kick off a Jenkins job. It pulls down the code. It does a Docker build, which basically calls npm install on your node environment, pulling in the dependencies and baking that into a Docker image, and then promoting that into production. So let's do that. So that's deployed now, so let's see if our message is now changed in production version. No, we're back here in the overview section where we're talking about production. And there we go. This is the dev version. Naturally, we don't want people to be too confused by the fact that we've just put dev into our production messages. So we should go back in here and put in something more useful again. So that's the broad strokes of how to edit your code, make nice short iterations here in the development environment until you're happy that all is well with your code. So just to reiterate, the development environment here, especially this terminal, is a bash shell, and a few little tips or tricks one should go over. This is like any other bash shell. You can type in ls, date, any command you might want. Usually curl is a good one. You can even use apt get update, apt get -y. I don't know, let's put in vim. So if during development you need a utility that you don't have, it's useful to use an installer to bring in those packages. These will not be deployed with your production, and often these utilities to help you in development aren't very useful in production, but it's good to note that you can add them here in your development environment. Another little trick is that occasionally the connection between this terminal and your microservice can get severed, and when that does happen, the icon up here will indicate that the connection is broken, and you can re-establish that connection just by clicking the broken link icon. So there's a VI installed. Any other packages, finds JQ quite useful. It's kind of a bash environment tool for manipulating JSON documents. One other thing to point out, and this will be the last piece, is that you'll notice that in the command line here we're no longer seeing the output of the microservice, yet if we do ps-ef, we'll see that it is actually running. So we ran it earlier and we navigated away from this screen and we went over to the overview page. Now we're back here, we're not seeing the output of it, but yet the process is running. This is very similar if multiple users are using this feature at the same time for the same microservice. It would be useful to just keep this command in your pocket, the ps-ef. is the development microservice running. I say that because there is only one development version of the microservice running, which would be shared by all the users who would be coming in. Microservices are meant to be microservices, and usually a small number, typically even one person, will be working on it. But if multiple users are working on it, you should just check to make sure that you're not standing on each other's toes. If you do find yourself in this situation and you do want to start and stop the microservice, if you type npm start or node index.js, it'll fail because it's already bound to port 8080 in this environment. So to do that, you would kill the process. So kill 79 ps -ef. See, there is no longer running. Now you can run npm start again. Now you get your standard out. So that's it. We hope you enjoy developing microservices. Hope this has been a useful video.